At 7 o'clock, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Can we take a roll call, please, Devin?
Ha.
Here.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem West Hafner.
Here.
Councilmember Russell. Councilmember Morrison.
Here.
Councilmember Parks.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem West Hafner, you have a quorum.
Okay, if everyone just please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, so we'll move on to number 2, which is public comment and response. 2A is response to prior public comment. Mr. Strobel.
Mayor Pro Tem West Hafner, members of council, there was no public comment at the last city council meeting.
Okay, then I'll move on to public comment, which is 2B, and I'll just, before we start, I'll just say that we received an email from Joe Close, which was a city message to residents. So we just wanted to make sure that people knew that we had an email from Mr. Close. And I did get a blue sheet from Miss Hempel. So Colette, you're up. You got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. I'd like to show you some pictures first. Hopefully they can zoom in on that and get it pretty close. You'll see how dry it is on this side of the street. And this one you can see that it continues all the way over by the corner. This is what it looks like on the opposite side of the street. And sadly, on July 3rd, some individuals that live in this building burnt this tree by sending a rather large rocket into it. They not only did that, but they sent rockets over the other side of the street that has up to 60-foot evergreens that have pine cones in them, and a drought condition that I showed you how dry most of that area is. There's no sprinklers on the south side for a half mile. And the one individual told them to stop when they let up this big Chinese lantern that was about 2 to 3 feet across. And they were swearing up a storm at him. The next rocket that they sent off went right into that tree, right near, maybe 20 feet maximum from his patio. I am asking you to stop the fireworks until we have had at least 1.5 to 2 inches of rain, to say no more in these sandy drainage ditches. Are people allowed to go down there and set off the fireworks when it's this dry? There are up to 6-foot tall weeds. In that area, there are between 12 and 20 dead trees, including at least a half a dozen 10-foot tall dead evergreens that are red in color. On the picture, they show up as these red ones. So they're not supposed to be red trees, they're supposed to be evergreens. Now, city staff are being very supportive of contacting the development, and will be doing something about the extra tall grass and the weeds. I don't know whether it's city property, since it's a drainage ditch like that, or whether the developer or the homeowners, or since It's connected with the overpass, that the state or county may have something to do with maintaining that. But this is the case of many drainage ditches, including the one on the other side of Regent Avenue. And I would appreciate you making it so that our police don't have to be the bad guy and tell somebody to stop. These individuals that did this were debating whether they should even call 911 after setting that tree on fire. It was totally dark. They shut off the lights and they went back inside and acted like they had done nothing. They made no effort to put out or put a hose on the area to make sure that any other ashes would not start this whole ditch on fire. Those homeowners all paid $300 grand for their homes, and to think that one person could set off close to 100 of them in total darkness with one fire hydrant a block away or across a double-lane median roadway. I'm asking for your help. I'm asking for it for all of our first responders. Like I said, our police should not have to be the bad guys, and our fire staff should not have to take the risk of an area that, if it had gone up in flames, ABC News reported on July 4th that a ditch like this, if it's not put out by a garden hose within 5 seconds,
Colette,
they're not going to get it under
bring
control.
your comments to a close?
So again, thank you, but please take an executive action tonight regarding these fireworks, because this drought isn't going away anytime soon. Thank you.
Thank you. This is still a public comment period. If anybody wishes to speak to the council on something that's not on our agenda, now's the time. Okay, not seeing anyone, I'll move on to the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, the agenda's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that carries. So now we'll move on to public presentations, proclamations, receipt of general communication. And so the first one is a proclamation proclaiming July 26, 2021 as Liberian Independence Day. So I'm just going to go down there, and I believe that Mr. George is going to be joining me, I think, if I can present it to him. I'll just read it and then I'll give it to you. So if I can actually read it. Liberian Independence Day, proclaiming July 26, 2021 as Liberian Independence Day in the Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, and celebrating the 174th anniversary of Liberians' Declaration of Independence. Whereas July 26, 2021 marks the 174th anniversary of the Liberian Declaration of Independence, and whereas Liberia, which means land of the free, was the first African nation on the African continent to gain its independence on July 26, 1847, and whereas through his infinite mercy and goodness, Almighty God has blessed the people of Liberia from July 26, 1847 up to the present, and whereas Liberians living in the city of Brooklyn Park and in Minnesota are making enormous contributions toward the development and workforce, cultural diversity, and economic growth, and whereas Brooklyn Park is proud to be called home to one of the largest populations of Liberians living outside of the Republic of Liberia, and has greatly benefited from the many residents who have taken active role in local organizations, city commissions, and city government. And whereas Brooklyn Park recognizes the rich and strong Liberian community that is making our city thriving, vibrant, and diverse, and whereas Liberians' Independence Day is an honor and to highlight the current and historical relationship between the United States and Liberia, and the vital contributions Liberians make to the United States and to Minnesota and to Brooklyn Park. Now, therefore, I, Tanya West Hafner, Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Brooklyn Park, do hereby proclaim July 26, 2021, shall be observed as Liberian Independence Day in the City of Brooklyn Park.
Thank you.
Did you want to say a few words at all?
Thank you. We really appreciate the relationship we have with the city of Brooklyn Park. Knowing fully well that outside of Liberia, we have the largest Liberian population in the city. And we appreciate this, the acknowledgement. Our independence is something that is dear to our hearts outside of Liberia. We celebrate it very well. And so I will be connecting with the rest of the other community members and sharing with them this proclamation to ensure that all Liberians in the city understand that the city of Brooklyn Park we call home. We appreciate you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then we'll move on to 3B2, which is a presentation of the police evaluation final report from the Wilder Foundation. I believe Wookie, okay.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, West Hafner, council members. My name is Wookie Freeman Buba, the Assistant City Manager. And this evening, I am proud to introduce our colleagues from the Wilder Research, who will be giving a presentation on the police evaluation. As you know, and it's included in your packets, this has been a journey since summer of 2020. The City Council charged the Human Rights Commission and the Police Department's Multicultural Advisory Committee to develop a work plan to come up with recommendations on police reform and racial justice. And there were a number of events to gather information with the community. And one of the actions in the fall of 2020 was to actually issue an RFP, a request for proposals, to do an evaluation on how our police department is performing. And so we now come to the part where we have that report. And at this time, before I turn it over to our colleagues, I would like to just show some appreciation for the countless hours and effort that the advisory committee members contributed to this effort, attending meetings and being very involved and engaged in the process, as well as the human rights commissioners and the members of the Multicultural Advisory Committee. And with that, I will invite Lindsey and Julie to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Julie Atella, and I wanted to say hello and to Mayor Pro Tem and the council members. I'm excited to talk about the study that we've been doing. I will be chatting about this today with my colleague Lindsey Turner. So tonight we're going to cover a couple of things that we want to make sure that everyone is aware of. The purpose of the study. We'll talk about an overview of the methods that were used, and then we'll dig into the key findings. We're also going to be sharing a snapshot of the Brooklyn Park Police Department scorecard, and then we'll end with recommendations and limitations. So the purpose of the study was to understand root causes of violence in Brooklyn Park. We also were charged with developing recommendations for improving community safety and providing an initial assessment of the Brooklyn Park Police Department's strengths and opportunities for improvement. Lastly, we worked with the Brooklyn Park Police Department and our advisory group in creating a scorecard to further assess the police department. Along with our understanding of the project's timeline and budget, these 4 questions helped us determine how to approach the project and which research methods to use. So the 4 guiding research questions were: what can community data show about the likely root causes of community violence and disorder in Brooklyn Park? What areas are the Brooklyn Park Police Department performing well in, and where are there areas for improvement? What research-backed evaluation tool could be used to improve Brooklyn Park Police outcomes? And also, what are research-driven methods to improve safety and policing in Brooklyn Park? We employed a mixed method approach to address those questions, which included conducting a rigorous literature review, analyzing community indicators, and interviewing some residents and employees of Brooklyn Park. We examined over 6 reports, nearly 20 indicators, including ones from the American Community Survey, which included Brooklyn Park residents, over 5,000 people from Brooklyn Park, and as well as the Brooklyn Park residential study data from 2019, which had information from about 800 resident respondents. We also conducted 56 interviews, had 8 advisory meetings, and 5 meetings with law enforcement to develop the scorecard. Throughout the project, we also met with key city staff. We'll mention them later in the conversation tonight. I wanted to just pause and talk a little bit more about 2 of these methods. While Wilder is accountable for the findings and recommendations of this study, it was critical to gather input and gain insights from key stakeholders in Brooklyn Park. We worked with city staff to convene a studies advisory committee and evaluation subcommittee. Committee and subcommittee members were invited by city staff. The advisory committee met monthly from January to July of this year, and the evaluation subcommittee met nearly every other week during the same time frame. At advisory committee meetings, Wilder presented updates about the project, reviewed the progress reports, and addressed emerging questions and concerns. At the evaluation subcommittees, we worked together to refine interview questions, develop the process to invite interview participants, and also refine and prioritize the scorecard indicators. Ultimately, we gathered a lot of feedback and guidance from the advisory and evaluation committees and appreciate all of their wisdom and time. A little bit more about the community interviews, which was one of the methods that we used. For the community member group, Wilder worked with the advisory committee members to develop an interview invitation plan, and advisory committee members agreed that invitations should prioritize hearing from people in the community who were not well reached by the 2020 listening session, including BIPOC residents and residents who have had experience calling Brooklyn Park Police Department for service or who had been stopped by Brooklyn Park Police Department. Brooklyn Park City staff created communications, including emails, social media posts, flyers, all of which would include a short link to a survey that was read by Wilder, and I think we had over 500, 600 respondents of that survey. From there, we were able to narrow it down based on some of the things that we knew that we were looking for and what we should prioritize. Advisory committee members and community leaders in Brooklyn Park were also encouraged to share the interview invitations with their networks. And just to give a highlight of this, Wilder staff asked community interviewees and the people who filled out the survey to identify their racial and ethnic background, among other things that I mentioned a moment ago. And here on this table, of the 36 community interviewees selected, 13 identified as Black or African American, 10 identified as Asian, 7 identified as white, 5 identified as African, and 5 identified as Latino or Hispanic. Further, I just wanted to mention that the above counts on this table include 8 individuals who identified with more than one race or ethnicity, so some people are counted more than once, and that's why it doesn't add up to 36. I'm going to pass it off to Lindsey for key findings.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having us here. It's wonderful to be at this point where we get to share some of the things that we learned with the Mayor Pro Tem and esteemed members of the Council. Thank you very much. I'm Lindsey Turner. I was co-researcher on this study. And I'm going to start out, we're going to address each of the key research questions. I'm going to start out by summarizing the research methods that we use to answer those questions for each of the sections. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Okay, can we hear me okay? Cool. So the first question had to do with underlying causes for violence in Brooklyn Park. And in order to answer the question, what are these root causes of violence, we first went to a research review. We read dozens of articles to understand the social conditions where safety thrives, to understand what community indicators, what community data can tell us about where those social conditions are present and where they're absent. And then we moved into actually finding and analyzing indicators from Brooklyn Park that Julie mentioned earlier. We looked at 18 different indicators. The majority of those came from Americans Community Survey data from 2019, which involved 5,000 surveys from residents across Brooklyn Park. And some of the data that we pulled, that we analyzed, also came from the 2019 residential study, which had 800 respondents across Brooklyn Park. With those indicators and that analysis in hand, we then went to the interviews to start to understand some of the strengths and challenges in Brooklyn Park with regards to making sure that everybody, no matter their race or their place, who lives in this city, has equal access to those social conditions where safety thrives. Those interviews weren't to determine where the root causes of violence are present or absent, but rather start to align what we already knew from the indicator review about where those conditions are present and absent with some of the actions that the council might want to take next in order to address some of the issues. And so, some high-level findings from this research review. Very generally speaking, safe communities are communities where people have what they need. There are studies of communities across the United States and indeed across the world that shows that where people are economically stable, where people have positive social connections, where people have access to culturally relevant and truly affordable health care, including preventative medicine, substance use counseling, and mental health supports, where people are connected and engaged at school, where people live in a healthy physical environment. These communities that are rich in all of these resources, all of these conditions, are communities that tend to be safer and have less violence than communities that lack some of these conditions. A really high-level finding from the research review also was that community data can illuminate where people have what they need. And finally, another really high-level finding is that systemic marginalization and systemic racism contribute to the unequal presence of risk factors. And by that I mean that policies and practices, generally speaking, across systems, usually in the United States, benefit white people and people with money, and can cause BIPOC people and people without as many resources to struggle further. We can't know anything about an individual's efforts or their potential by looking at what the indicators say about their outcomes. But we can change policies and practices so that outcomes are equal across races and places. And with that, I will present a very high-level review of our community indicator analysis. You can find a lot more detail about why we selected the indicators that we did and what we found when we started to compare them across races and census tracts in Brooklyn Park in Appendix C of the report. There are some indicators, some conditions that risk violence, that cause violence, where data are not available in Brooklyn Park, including information about kind of the physical environment, about family trauma, and about positive youth development opportunities, but there are lots of places where there are available community-level data about Brooklyn Park that can tell us about these important social conditions where safety thrives. And what we found from the analysis of Brooklyn Park indicators was that there are disparities across race and place in terms of economic equality, in terms of economic stability, in terms of health care, and in terms of neighborhood cohesion. And all of those conditions can risk violence in community. I'm happy to answer questions about specifics during questions and answers, but I just want to kind of move through some high-level findings first. An example of some key disparities that we found, what you're looking at here is a couple of data visualizations about owner-occupied housing rates. The bar chart is by race, and the map is by census tracts that nest in Brooklyn Park. And what we see in that orange bar is that 68% of people who live in Brooklyn Park live in homes that they own. And then we break out the races by there. The next bar is white folks. 87% of white people in Brooklyn Park live in homes that they own. Compared to those next bars, 41% of black people in Brooklyn Park and 39% of American Indian or Native people in Brooklyn Park live in homes that they own. So there's rather large disparities there. We also see some geographic disparities when we start to look at the different census tracts. Those really dark blue saturated areas are areas where a large majority, 80% or more of people live in homes that they own. So along the north and along the river in Brooklyn Park, between 80 to 99% of people in those census tracts live in homes that they own. And then in the south, you can see decreased saturation means less people are living in homes that they own. That really, really lightly shaded blue one, kind of in the south central, it's just 25% of people are living in homes that they own. And we highlight this as like a key indicator because home ownership can point to economic stability, it can point to generational wealth generation, it can have educational opportunity ripple effects because of the ways that schools are funded sometimes, and it also can start to speak to neighborhood connections and neighborhood stability and what it takes to really bring a community together and foster those positive relationships. So, we turn next to some findings from the interviews about the social conditions where safety thrives and the root causes of violence in Brooklyn Park. This is a spot where we really worked with the evaluation subcommittee to help us refine our interview questions and really prioritize asking questions of Brooklyn Park employees and residents that were designed to generate the maximum amount of usable information for the council. For example, we did draft some questions that kind of went along with the educational indicators and things like that, but really quickly learned that because of the overlapping layers of government, the impact students from Brooklyn Park, there's districts and cities and all sorts of minutia, we didn't end up prioritizing asking questions about education because we wanted to prioritize those questions where this council could really pick it up and take some action without having to involve other government stakeholders. So we asked questions about economic conditions, neighborhood conditions, and youth conditions in Brooklyn Park. We first asked questions about what interviewees thought, what they see in Brooklyn Park. Do they see equity? Do they see inequity in these social conditions? And then we asked interviewees about their experiences with the programs, services, and supports that Brooklyn Park might offer in order to bolster success and outcomes in these conditions. So, for example, with the economic conditions, we were asking if people thought that there was economic equity across Brooklyn Park, and then if they had any experience accessing programs or services in order to increase their own economic well-being, like homeowner loans or whatever might be out there. So with all of that, with the economic conditions, by and large, interviewees agreed that there are two Brooklyn parks. There is a strong theme that interviewees see economic disparities in Brooklyn Park. It was also a theme that there are not sufficient services or supports in Brooklyn Park to build economic stability for all who could benefit from those services. We asked people if they had experiences with these types of services to build economic stability, and no themes came out of the interview. And I'll pause here because I don't think I've defined a theme yet. When we went through and after we had completed all of the interviews, we read all the interview transcripts and we coded them using some coding software, and where interviewees endorsed roughly the same sort of idea, we started keeping track of what those ideas were, and where 5 or more interviewees had a similar experience or perception, that rose to the level of a theme, and that information is included in greater detail in the report. As far as neighborhood conditions, people had lots of perceptions about different neighborhood connection initiatives and what neighborhood connections, what community connections look like in Brooklyn Park. On the perception, what they thought, what they see in Brooklyn Park, on that side of the equation, interviewees who were living south of 85th Avenue North reported negative perceptions of neighborhood connections in Brooklyn Park. And this was not a theme for interviewees who live north of 85th Avenue North. Interviewees, regardless of where they lived, reported that not everybody feels a sense of community in Brooklyn Park. They did report, there was a theme that there are positive neighborhood connection opportunities. Another theme was that community engagement initiatives do less for BIPOC residents. They tend to be less accessible or less outreach, less buy-in, whatever it is. And a final theme was interviewees thought that Brooklyn Park could improve outreach for neighborhood connection initiatives. And then among residents who had experience with neighborhood connection initiatives, the only theme that emerged was that it was positive. They loved the block parties, the rec on the go, national night out. People got a lot of value out of coming together with their neighbors at these types of events or through these sorts of initiatives at the city. The last bucket of questions that we asked interviewees about the social conditions where safety thrives have to do with youth conditions, services and supports that foster positive connections for youth. On the perception side of the equation, on what interviewees think about Brooklyn Park, there were 4 main themes. One is that there are many high-quality park and recreation centers. People were really singing those praises. Another was that Zanewood Rec Center specifically helps foster youth engagement and those youth connections. Another theme was that youth engagement doesn't reach all who are interested. And a final theme from what people think about Brooklyn Park is that many people are unaware of some of the youth connection and youth development opportunities that exist in the city. And then for people who had experiences with youth connection initiatives in Brooklyn Park, they reported nothing but good. The only themes that emerged were positive. They're positive experiences with community ed and other youth programming, and positive experiences with youth sports and with summer camps. So that's on the root causes of violence and what we can tell from the community indicators, as well as some of the information that we got from the interviews that hopefully can help you take targeted action. Our next research question had to do with policing in Brooklyn Park. For this, we used relatively similar methods. We started with a research review of dozens of sources based in the United States because of the particular nature of our criminal legal system on the impacts of policing and policing best practices. We also did a document review to better understand the rules that govern the Brooklyn Park Police Department in order to understand if there are opportunities or strengths in the way that the department is structured that we can talk about. And because of these structures, there's likely to be good outcomes. So we did that review. And then again, we had asked interview questions of everybody that we interviewed to see if they had experiences with the Brooklyn Park Police Department, what those experiences were like, and to understand perceptions of the Brooklyn Park Police Department, regardless of whether or not they had experience being stopped or calling for service. Again, with the interviews, it wasn't intended, the interviews were not alone, were not intended to be a comprehensive assessment of the Brooklyn Park Police Department, just to help identify some preliminary findings to generate actionable ideas for this council. We did build a very comprehensive tool, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So, with policing in Brooklyn Park, findings from the research, a really key high-level finding to highlight is that policing has limited effects on safety. Research is really clear, there's robust consensus that police activities and crime rates or rates of violent crime in community really move independently of each other. Most policing has little to do with serious safety threats. Nationally, researchers estimate that fewer than 5% of arrests are arrests for serious violent offenses. Public data doesn't exist in Brooklyn Park that allows us to make an apples-to-apples comparison, but we can start to understand what the Brooklyn Park situation is by looking at the crime categories on the crime statistics dashboard. And those show that well over half of the crime in Brooklyn Park is property or society crime, society crimes being crimes like disorderly conduct or drug use. That accounts for roughly 68% of crime that's reported on those crime dashboards in Brooklyn Park. And some national researchers have gotten data through Freedom of Information Act requests from the Brooklyn Park Police Department, and they present on a website estimating that around 57% of the arrests made by Brooklyn Park Police Department are arrests for low-level offenses. We also know from the research that more police and more incarceration may not reduce crime. Like I said before, there's robust consensus that crime rates are not related to the number of officers on a force or to strict policing of low-level crimes such as property damage or illicit substance use. Further, strict policing of this sort can cause harm that contributes to further violence. Incarceration is criminogenic. Arrests tend to remove people from the social conditions, the positive connections that they have, and are terribly destabilizing events that there's consensus that those sorts of events can be what we call criminogenic. They can create risks of future violence in community. Okay, so those are the high-level findings from the research review about policing and the connection to safety. I will say another thing that comes up time and again in the research is that treatment, restorative practices, interventions, and robust diversion opportunities are usually better for survivors and get to the root causes of violence better than incarceration. And then, so shifting from a look at just kind of policing and the connection to safety to policing best practices, what we found are 5 kind of key best practices where research connects these particular things to desirable outcomes, such as increased community trust or lower levels of police use of force. So that first point is that bans or requirements for informed consent for consent-based searches are a policing best practice because they can help to reduce reliance on low-level arrests and start to reduce racial disparities in the criminal justice system. And that happens because what the research shows is that first off, the average person on the street doesn't super understand that they have the right to say no when a police officer asks, may I search that? And police officers tend to ask for these consent-based searches more frequently of people who are members of the BIPOC community, but they find less contraband, there's a lower kind of hit rate or lower success rate in finding contraband or evidence of illegal activity when they conduct these searches than when they conduct searches of white individuals. But because they're so frequently asking for these types of searches from BIPOC members of the community, the yeses start to pile up and it starts to introduce disparities into the justice system that have nothing to do with actual rates of criminal behavior. De-escalation is mentioned as a best practice. Just definitionally, it's an officer's ability to calm down a situation. It's going to lead to less use of force over time. research shows that requiring proactive officers to identify themselves each and every time that they're interacting with a community member, handing off a card, giving their name and their badge number, is associated with treating people with greater respect and with less use of force and less civilian complaints against police officers. Procedural justice is on this list. Procedural justice is the concept that when people are treated with dignity and respect, when they have an opportunity to say what's important to them, when they perceive people in positions of power as being neutral in their decision making, and the people in positions of power are trustworthy, these all combine to create a concept that we call procedural justice, and that is associated in the research with higher levels of community trust in police, where police behave in accordance with procedural justice. Finally, a best practice from the research is that union contracts and other laws that govern police behavior promote accountability for officer misconduct. There are specifically, research shows that certain types of union contract provisions, certain types of law enforcement Bill of Rights provisions that erase or obscure misconduct records, that mean that civilians aren't fully informed during the discipline process, that mean that the discipline process happens internally. All of those things are associated with higher levels of police use of force and higher risk that police kill somebody. So taking those 5 practices that are connected in the research to positive outcomes in turn, what we found by looking at the rules that govern the Brooklyn Park Police Department is that consent-based searches are allowed. The best practice is that they're not allowed, or that if they're not outright banned, that officers have some sort of informed consent procedure that they go through with the individual so that that person is very clearly advised of their right to refuse the search. They have to sign off on it. That's documented. Here in Brooklyn Park, consent-based searches are allowed. De-escalation is mandated in the Policy and Procedure Manual for the Brooklyn Park Police Department where possible and appropriate. But we don't have use of force data available at the time that this report was finalized. And so we're not entirely sure what the connection is between that policy and what's actually going on. We will say that public data that was pulled from that Freedom of Information Act request from researchers, so public data about the use of force per arrest for the Brooklyn Park Police Department from the years 2016 to 2019 found that Brooklyn Park police officers are better than every other department in America because they have not killed anybody, and that they use more force per arrest than 77% of police departments across the country. As far as the proactive officer identification requirement, that requirement is not in place in Brooklyn Park. The Policy and Procedure Manual allows people to ask officers to identify themselves, and then the officer shall produce some sort of identification, but it's not proactive. And so if people don't know that they have that right, they might not use it, and we might not be getting the full benefit of the less use of force and the greater respect. Procedural justice appears many, many times throughout the Policy and Procedure Manual and the other documents that we've reviewed around the Brooklyn Park Police Department, and it was frequently mentioned in our interviews as a strength for the Brooklyn Park Police Department. We'll get to that in a minute, so that looks like probably an area where the Brooklyn Park Police Department is strong. And then as far as those key limits on accountability and discipline, we find those limits in Minnesota law. Statute 626.89 include provisions that that give police officers rights in regards to pushing back against discipline and misconduct that are associated in the research with greater use of force and greater frequency of police or greater risk of police officers killing people. And next we turn to themes from the interviews. Like Julie said earlier, we prioritized inviting people to do interviews who indicated on the online survey that they had prior experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department. We asked everybody that we interviewed if they or someone they knew and loved had a close experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department, including calling for service or being stopped or being investigated, something beyond like I work at a school and there's a school resource officer, something just a personal close experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department. We ended up speaking with 31 people who had that type of experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department. And then here we list the themes, the common ideas that came out of the interviews with those 31 ideas in order from most frequent to least frequent. So the most frequently mentioned thing from people who had close experience with BPPD was that the experience was negative. We counted more reports of negative experiences than positive, and those reports were made by more than half of the 31 interviewees. The next most common theme was that people had a positive experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department. And those reports were reported by more than half of the 31 interviewees, indicating that sometimes people have a good experience and sometimes they don't. So yeah, some of those positive experiences included really stressful situations, including BPPD investigating firearms or burglaries or responding to crises. And then we asked interviewees who had this close experience to identify what went well in the interaction and what they thought Brooklyn Park Police Department could do better. And again, in descending order of frequency, interviewees reported that procedural justice, that being treated with dignity and respect, is an area where Brooklyn Park Police Department does well. And then the next most frequent theme is that's an area where they could improve. Then the last two themes had to do with de-escalation, and these weren't closed-ended questions. People could say whatever they wanted to say about the experience. They just honed in on these two ideas. So the second to last most frequently reported theme was that de-escalation is an area where Brooklyn Park Police Department could improve, and the least frequently reported theme was that de-escalation is an area where Brooklyn Park does well. This slide is our attempt to synthesize a whole lot of information for you. The top row shows themes from those experiences with Brooklyn Park Police Department, from open-ended questions. The next two rows highlight findings from our questions about perceptions. Whether or not somebody had an experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department, we asked them what they thought about the Brooklyn Park Police Department in these four key areas: accountability, de-escalation, effectiveness, and procedural justice. And what we found is that in the resident interviewees, in terms of accountability, more people than not agreed with the statement that BPBD listens to diverse community concerns and makes changes to address those concerns. The next column there is about de-escalation. An equal number of interviewees agreed and disagreed with the statement that BPPD intervenes in crime and community violence in ways that de-escalate situations and without violence. That third column is about effectiveness. More interviewees than not disagreed with the statement BPPD intervenes in crimes in ways that interrupt criminal behavior to create safety. And then on that last procedural justice, an equal number of interviewees agreed or disagreed with the statement that BPPD intervenes in crimes in ways that treat people with dignity and respect. And just kind of meaning making from all of this information, the thing that stands out to me as a researcher is always areas where the research says a thing and community, like interviews, tend to agree or support that. And I think it's really good news that one of our key findings, the one that police and safety are largely unrelated, is in line with community and Brooklyn Park Police interviewee attitudes. That last row has to do with what we found when we talked to 5 Brooklyn Park Police Department interviewees. And in terms of effectiveness, officers did agree that there are limits to their effectiveness. And so there is some alignment between the research about the lack of connection between policing and safety and what community already is starting to report through these interviews and what officers started to report through these interviews as well. Okay. Another area of inquiry for us were what are some research-based methods to address violence in Brooklyn Park? And for this, we use similar methods as before, a robust research review about what works to intervene in violence or prevent violence. And then again, we asked all interviewees about their perceptions of 2 research-backed ways to intervene in violence, again, to start to surface ideas about community attitudes and strengths and needs in the hopes of giving you the most useful information for implementing some of these changes possible. So, kind of combining these things, research shows that there are effective interventions. One that gets mentioned frequently in the research is restorative justice, which involves community-based workers. Like, once harm has occurred, community-based workers wrap around both the survivor of the harm and the perpetrator of the harm. And where survivors consent, workers can build relationships with everybody involved, with the ultimate goal of bringing people together, getting the responsible party to understand the impacts of their behavior, and co-creating a plan to ensure accountability and repairing that harm, setting things right. Evidence shows the restorative interventions, even in instances of serious violence and physical injury, are effective mechanisms to promote accountability and reduce the risk of future harm by the responsible party. They tend to really get to the root causes, repair safety, and help heal the survivor and help address issues that the responsible party needs to address. Research also shows that they can reduce symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder in those that were harmed. And we found several strengths and concerns mentioned by community members when we asked them about this idea and what they thought was good or what kind of concerned them, that really kind of get to the findings from our research review. They thought restorative justice is likely to promote positive growth. They like that it supports harmed parties as well as responsible parties, and that it addresses root causes of violence and harm. Some concerns, not all of them are backed by the research, but one concern was that restorative interventions might not be as effective for more serious or violent incidents. I'm here to report that there's emerging research that shows that when survivors choose restorative interventions, there can be high success rates, even in cases of extreme violence. People were also concerned that harmed parties might not want to participate, or that the responsible party might not want to do the work of accountability and changing so that they don't do the same thing again. Another positive intervention or effective intervention that came out in the research is something called focused deterrence. These initiatives can prevent some types of community violence. It involves the identification of specific people and groups who are at risk of creating violence in the community, and then mobilizing a diverse group of stakeholders, including social services, community stakeholders, and law enforcement, and framing a response that uses both sanctions like community service or things like that, and rewards, and direct, repeated communication with the individuals identified in order to stop and interrupt violence. Studies have shown that focused deterrence is related to reduced community violence, reduced homicides. And other research, not specifically on focused deterrence, but on the social conditions for safety, is in line with this. It shows that communities with robust stakeholder involvement, robust community input into violence prevention and violence intervention initiatives are communities that do more to reduce violence. Interviewees identified several strengths and concerns, including that focused deterrence might not address root causes of harm. And people also tended to be concerned that, another strength is that the partnerships involved could help foster community and foster understanding in ways that would be beneficial for Brooklyn Park. a common concern from community was that bias, racism, stigma, unfair blame could all lead to inappropriately identifying people who are at risk or people who would be identified as high priority for the focused deterrence intervention. And then finally, findings from the research that we didn't have time to talk to people about in the interviews, that would be research-driven recommendations to improve violence, addressing violence in Brooklyn Park, include reducing reliance on policing. There are several behavioral health interventions that include community-based first responder models like Cahoots out in Eugene, Oregon, that has a 30-plus year track record of a lot of success responding to mental health crises and substance use crises in ways that do not involve the police, but that get people hooked up with the social services that they need to not be a danger to themselves or others. School-based interventions are other emerging ways to reduce reliance on policing, but still be addressing some of these like social conditions. There's a local-ish neighboring school district, ISD 287, has really did intentional work for a few years to saturate their district with restorative practices and a lot of social emotional supports for some high-need students. And they were able to remove and get rid of their contract with school resource officers, no longer have police officers in their schools, but are handling unsafe student behavior with school-based workers to great success. And then there's other emerging methods that you probably know about that are included in statements from Brooklyn Center, Human Rights, and your own Human Rights Commissions here. So we encourage you to take a look at that. That's enough of my voice for a while. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll pass it back to Julie.
I'm shorter, so I'll bring it down here. Thanks, Lindsey. I just have a few final things to mention. We wanted to cover just our 3 recommendations. The first is to focus on prevention. So to improve safety, the city should address inequities and ensure that the social conditions where safety thrives are equally distributed across races and places in Brooklyn Park. The second is to improve interventions. The city should explore using community-based mental health and substance use responses, as well as school-based safety workers and other efforts to refocus police responsibilities. The city should expand with robust community partnerships, focused deterrence initiatives, and interventions, including treatment and restorative justice. And then lastly, assessing Brooklyn Park PD for improvements. We've developed a scorecard to measure the police department's performance, and we recommend the city, Brooklyn Park Police Department, and community members impacted by systemic marginalization and police contact partner together to assess and use that information to make meaning and measurable changes. And then we did want to kind of provide an overview of what the scorecard looks like. Council members have it in their packet, and it also will be available for others to look at on various websites that we'll share. But the way that we developed the scorecard is we used the research and the literature, as well as the interviews, and then we reviewed some of the Brooklyn Park Police Department's policies and other rules governing the police department. And from there, we created a scorecard. The scorecard, there are 10 goals, and they are based on evidence from the literature, the themes from the interviews, and guidance from advisory group and the HRC work plan. The scorecard should be completed by a team of community members, city employees, including the police department, of course, the Human Rights Commission, the Multicultural Advisory Committee, and other leaders in Brooklyn Park. We recommend that it's completed at least annually, knowing that some of the things that are in the scorecard may need to be looked at in more frequently, or some might not be available on an annual basis. I'm going to show a I want to go over the 10 areas that are in the scorecard. There are these goal areas that include the law enforcement policy is the first one. The second goal is training, then transparency, community oversight. The fifth is commitment to standards. Officer wellness and safety is a goal area, community policing, data-driven management, quality services, and then the last goal section is safety. I know this is very hard to see, but this is a snapshot of what the scorecard looks like for goal number 1. Each section of goals provides a list of indicators. The list of indicators are in the middle, policy indicators. So in this case, we have use of force, body-worn camera, union contract, stops, protest response, consent to search, and social media use by department and officers in unofficial capacities. So those are the indicators there for this specific goal. And then there's on the left side a scoring range from 1 to 5. These scoring scales will be different for each of the goals because they'll align with what the goal area is. And then there's also a place in each goal area to give some ideas of where the sources can be found and allow people, the group of people that are working on the scorecard, to determine where they're going to find some of these data or how they're going to look at it. And then the 2 columns that you might be able to see in the middle has both an individual score and a consensus score. And at the end of doing that, there's discussion and next steps that happen. For more information about the scorecard, you can visit the Brooklyn Park website and also the Wilder website. So I'm going to end with just some limitations of the study. We go in a lot more detail about this in the report, but the timeline, scope, and budget had to be considered and put some parameters on the amount of time we could invest in each method. So, for instance, key informant interviews, they don't reflect the perspectives of all city employees or residents. We simply weren't charged with asking or getting a representative sample of people to interview. So we just want to make sure that what we reflect in the report and what we talked about today, we can't say that that speaks for all residents. Also, a second limitation is that not all community indicators were analyzed. And again, that's for the scope and timing of things. We had to narrow it down, and we used the guidance of our advisory group to help with that, as well as the literature. Available demographic data may not reflect the diversity of Brooklyn Park, so we know that there's missing data, and that's just part of collecting data, and we didn't have everything that we may have needed, or it may not reflect the diversity. Another thing to point out as a limitation is due to the gaps in the research, it's not always possible to connect police practices to desired outcomes. A lot of the police work that's being done and research is newer or emerging, and so there's not necessarily a best practice. And then lastly, the scorecard's proposed metrics are not always exhaustive or equal, and we address some of this with the help of our team from the Brooklyn Park Police Department in making sure that we can highlight some of the things that really should be looked at based on the literature, but not all of the metrics or those indicators that I briefly just showed you for goal number 1 are necessarily equally as important in making change. I won't read out the list of everybody, but we did want to give a special thank you to our advisory group, to the folks from the city that have helped us with this really exciting endeavor that we did in a very short amount of time during a pandemic and a whole bunch of other things. So thank you very much to all of them. And that is what we have to say for our presentation, and thank you for the time.
I muted myself instead of turning on. I'll just see if anybody has any questions. Councilmember Pa?
When you went through the study and worked with our committee, was there was there indication from the team or from the community as to a timeline of when they would like to see some of these things implemented, or how fast they want to see some of these things done?
I can go ahead with that. We can imply by the amount of engagement and enthusiasm that we got from our advisory committee members and our evaluation subcommittee members, and also at 2 separate community-facing presentations that we've done on high-level findings for this, that there's a lot of community excitement and a lot of city excitement to pick up some of these initiatives and try new things. We didn't specifically ask anybody to prioritize or come up with a timeline, and so we don't have anything more specific than that. But this has been a project where there's been robust engagement and enthusiasm, and we'd love to see that.
Okay, thank you. And I really like the scorecard because I think it has measurable indicators that really can assess our strengths, like what we do well, our weakness, what we can improve on. I know that you mentioned that these things are some things that we could do annually. Some things we can assess a little bit less frequent, maybe biannually. But I'm wondering, have you also had any experience with cities who have done something like the scorecard, if whether or not in a certain amount of years they have seen improvements within their department or safety in their community?
That wasn't an area of the research that we looked into specifically, like how many years making X, Y, or Z changes in the police department you could expect to see some sort of improvement in one outcome or another. So we don't have that comparison off the top of our head. I would say, though, if you're interested in trying to prioritize which ones of the indicators to really focus in on or pick up and move with really rapidly, the ones that are in bold italics are ones. Oh my God, we really researched this. So the scorecard is presented in a standalone document, and it has its own appendix. And in that appendix, you can find out which indicators were connected in the research or came up in themes in interviews, have some sort of alignment either with research or with something that's going on in Brooklyn Park where people are really interested in honing in on that particular thing. So hopefully that helps with prioritization.
Yeah. I really like the idea of the scorecard. And I ask that question because I wonder if we share, cities can share their experiences and best practices and how things have improved or not, how we can learn from others, right? But I think this is just a start. And as we move forward, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more data, a lot more information that will be shared nationwide. I also just want to say that, I agree with a lot of what has already been said in the study and from the people of the interviewees, that prevention and intervention is very important, that we must invest in our root causes of violence in the crime in our city, and that restorative justice and focusing on deterrence is something very, very important. And I'll be looking forward to ideas that we can do that and how we can implement that in here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else have any comments or questions? Councilmember Morrison?
Good evening. I just want to say thank you to both of you for all of your hard work and a team that worked diligently to put this together. So I was part of that and had an upfront, close, bird's eye view of all of your hard-earned effort and what you brought to us today. I'm truly thankful for you guys and your hard work. And just for clarification purposes, you made a statement, BIPOC. You mentioned that 3 times. Can you tell us what BIPOC is? Some people might not know what that means, so they'll know that for clarification.
That is the acronym for Black, Indigenous, People of Color.
Thank you. And then you also made in your reference that the community south of 85th was not as stable with their opinions about the resources to our particular community because they were unstable or not stable in I guess, purchasing homes or their resources or the lack thereof or those type of things. And I just wanted to add, could we also include instability as well with that statement as stable and instability as well? So I just wanted to add that we can use both of those in that particular presentation that you guys made because of the lack of resources that residents, as you identified, south of 85th are experiencing and felt and feel that they not being looked at as they're north of 85th in your report. So again, I just want to say thank you guys. I just wanted to say that. And again, it was a joy and a pleasure working with you guys. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Morrison. Likewise.
I too want to thank you for the work that you've done. I have some concerns on this, and I have from day one. I have a real concern of non-police telling police officers what their job is. A real concern about that. The other issue that I've had, and I've brought it up several times, and they've all heard it, is that 40 years in the fire service with me, if a firefighter gets in trouble, we hold that firefighter accountable. If a police officer gets in trouble, we hold the entire nation of police officers accountable for what one did. So, and it makes no sense to me. I don't want to sit up here. I don't mind helping with this if I can. I don't want to sit up here and have this body micromanage our police department. I don't want to see that happen. So if there's a way we can do this, I understand, getting involved as much as we can, because I think our side of it's going to be the budget side of it, if we have the money to do the programs we want. But I'm going to stand by our police department, and I say that our police department is top of the line for me. I mean, I would think that if, and maybe I'm thinking wrong, if you don't commit a crime, you're not going to have a negative activity with the police department. So if we can maybe stop people from committing crimes, that would be great too. So that's part of the prevention thing. But I know one thing that I did not see in the report was what happens with outside influences, because we have people that come into this town and cause problems and then leave. And that's something that I think we're going to have an issue with, trying to talk to them people and say, hey, stop, because they're not going to. So I mean, those are just some of my concerns about it. I'm going to have to wait and see how this report card goes, because I don't like that non-police department people are telling police what their job is. So, and that's just my side of things. So, thank you.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you for the work that you were charged to complete this project. I am looking forward to our work session where we can dig in a little more than tonight. But I do have some clarifying questions. So did the experiences that the interviewees made mention of, so I just want to remind everyone there were 31 interviewees. Did the experiences they mentioned have a required time frame? In other words, could they have been speaking about something that happened to them 20 years ago?
They may have, but the question was, do you or a loved one have experience with the Brooklyn Park Police Department in the last 5 years? We were hoping to get some recency. We're relying on self-reports, so maybe people told stories from beyond 5 years ago, but we did try and frame it up within the last 5 years.
Okay, but we really have no way to know if they were speaking about a period of time close to today.
Like with any self-reported data, there's no way to.
Okay. You made a comment, or you said we needed to make things more equal. So do you have examples of where we can change policies and practices to make things more equal?
I think an excellent example comes in just the economic stability side of the equation. One policy that the city of St. Paul is pursuing is some universal basic income stipends for people who are at the lowest end of the economic stability spectrum. And that's a policy that's geared towards bolstering supports for those who are most in need and, according to the research, most at risk of either perpetrating or surviving violence. That would be an example of a policy that starts to inject some supports, prioritizing people who have been most harmed by the policies that are in place now.
Another thing that you stated was around the areas of schools and healthcare. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware that we, as the city council body, we are not the school board, and we do not have an impact on the policies in any healthcare facility in our city.
Yeah.
When we have this map that's up on the screen right now, and we have affordable housing in certain areas in our community, we are building another project north of 85th by North Hennepin that is coming. But what impact do you think having many options of affordable housing in Brooklyn Park does to this study?
I think that's an excellent question, and would need to know a little bit more about geographies where those affordable housing units are being built, because on first blush, my best guess is that they're being built south of 85th. And one of the things that we know from the research is that economically mixed neighborhoods are safer neighborhoods. It's good to weave in a variety of income and wealth levels within kind of the microgeography. It's good for safety, it's good for social connections, it's good for access for resources, it's good for a lot of different reasons. We weren't tasked with, and we didn't specifically looked at where the affordable housing units are being built. But if they're concentrated geographically in one or two or a handful of census tracts and not in others, then that, and my assumption is that that would then contribute to some of these disparities that risk further violence.
Okay. You talk about the half of the Brooklyn Park crime are property crimes and what you call society crimes like drug use. Just today, several of us received an email from a resident who is afraid to go to sleep at night because of the drug deals going on in the neighborhood time and time and time again. So would that be categorized in a society crime, like something that is of a lesser offense? Is that what you're saying?
The classification that I pointed to comes from the Brooklyn Park Police Department crime statistics websites. That's how they're classifying the crime. So I was just using definitions that are consistent with the data that's available to us.
So I had an opportunity today to meet with a young man, a young black man who grew up here, is proud to be here. He's a business owner. He just created a nonprofit. But he talked about how the friends he grew up with, the ones who didn't have anybody there when they got home at night, were the ones that ended up in gangs in Minneapolis and are now in prison. And he spoke about this in a way that really struck me. Because this body can't force people to be at home when their children get there at the end of a day. So when we look at root cause, I want us really to dig into the leading indicators. Leading indicators were happening in that kid's life back then, and what could have, should have been done back then. Because this report comes at a time when we as a community, shots are being fired every single day in the city. And I've yet to see one of them be shot by one of our police officers. And so I, am a bit torn about this work right now because we have a lot of things to take care of here. Our residents, A, they expect that the police will enforce the laws that we have on the books. And B, that the offenders of those laws need to be held accountable. And so that is my struggle today as we look to this further work. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. And if I may, in response to that really powerful anecdote about the conversation that you had today, yes, you're absolutely right. The council has no right to tell parents when they're home, things like that. But we can all think of some policies or some practices that would attract living wage work to Brooklyn Park so that on 32, 40 hours of work a week, parents can be home. We can think of policies that would help with affordable housing in Brooklyn Park so that people aren't out scrambling at 2 or 3 jobs and leaving their kids at home unattended. We can think about ways to reach youth who aren't engaged, who don't have positive social supports within their household, but can be connected with mentors in programs in Brooklyn Park that can help support their positive development. So I think it's just as important when we think about what we can't do to also think about what we're doing to improve the system so that those consequences happen naturally. And then I lost my train of thought. Thank you very much.
So just to respond to that, I do think, and you see it in the study, that the opportunities for youth, because years ago, we made youth a focus to the degree where we had seniors saying, what about us, right? And we did do that work as well. But we have really worked hard to make our youth programming available, accessible, affordable, if not free. So I think we in Brooklyn Park stand out in the sea of communities in that work. But what we can't impact is, as I used to say when I would do leading indicator work around youth homelessness and working in the schools, when the bell rings at the end of the day, the schools are like, we can't impact what happens from here until they show up again tomorrow. And so we all have to come together. This community, all of our residents, we need to come together and figure this out and not just talk about it anymore. We need to do it.
Absolutely. If I may, I do remember the other thing that I was teeing up to say. It's a little out of turn, but to your comment about the community understands the laws and expects the police officers to enforce those laws and to secure accountability. I think one of the things that research shows, and that would be really good if we could start to have the hard conversations around this, is that punishment and accountability are 2 completely different things. Punishment happens to somebody. They don't have to be sorry. They don't have to care. They don't have to demonstrate any positive personal growth that's going to get them on a better track. Accountability, like I tell my 7-year-old, is saying you're sorry and then doing sorry. Punishment is not that, and we know that from the research. I really hope that this body picks up the really difficult work of how to imbue accountability in ways that makes sure that everybody, the worth and the dignity of people, families, and this community are really geared towards healing and dignity and better chances.
Councilmember Russell.
Thank you. And thanks a lot for all of the efforts and all of the work that you all put into this report and this process. And as was said previously, we'll be taking a much deeper dive later on. this presentation is just sort of to help give us some context as to what we'll be dealing with when we do a meeting work session. I just have a few questions and comments. One is the 31 or so people that you spoke to. How did you find them? How did you get them?
Sure. So we worked with our advisory committee and with our city connections to advertise it through social media, flyers, community leads, and put things out that way. We also had, Facebook, those kind of things. They were sent out that way, and then people were able to go to the link that we created at Wilder and provide some information from there. And then we narrowed it down based on the number of people that we were able to interview and the criterion of looking for people who had experience with Brooklyn Park Police Department, and then some of the BIPOC group that we wanted to make sure we heard voices from. So it was really through social media and other ways of flyers and sending out things to leaders in the community to start advertising for it as well.
Were any stories left out? Were any folks left out who were not, stories were not included in this report?
By stories, you mean were people? I mean, we would narrow down the number of people that we spoke to based on the timeline and budget. I would say that we know for sure that not everybody who might have been interested probably knew about it because of the limited time and ability of getting it out. And we knew that going into it with the wise wisdom of the advisory group letting us know that, and we kind of had to proceed accordingly due to the time frames. But so we definitely didn't hear everybody's story, nor did everybody have the opportunity to even know about the opportunity to be part of the interview.
Okay.
And that was one of the limitations. Sorry. Go ahead.
And what's the population, baseline population you're working with for this report? Brooklyn Park's population?
The population of Brooklyn Park? Oh, 80,000-ish. 82,000.
82,000?
I don't have it off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I have.
It's about 82,000, okay. Would you consider this a representative sample of 82,000, and what efforts do you all make to get a representative sample if you believe this wasn't, or do you believe this was a representative sample of?
It was not a representative sample, and that was not what we were aiming to get voices of.
Why not?
That wasn't how we approached the study, based on using some of the information that we had from the listening sessions and from other things that we looked at, the community survey from 2019, and the other things that we were looking at with literature and with the community indicators. The study was not simply to do interviews of a representative sample. We wanted to really aim towards the people who didn't have voices in those two things specifically. And so that's, again, one of the limitations is that we can't say that this speaks to, is a representative voice of all Brooklyn Park residents.
I want to add some nuance to that. With each of the research questions that we had, where Brooklyn Park community data is needed to answer the question. For example, what's a root cause of violence in Brooklyn Park? Thankfully, there's already representative samples of community data from Brooklyn Park that have been gathered very recently, so we didn't have to go out and recreate the census. It wouldn't have made any sense for the budget or the time frame for us to try and recreate a representative sample survey of Brooklyn Park residents, especially when that information is already available. And so we did use thousands and thousands and thousands of Brooklyn Park surveys from Brooklyn Park residents to inform our results. And like we said, the interviews were really to start to help hone in on some community attitudes, perceptions that can help guide your work moving forward, but wasn't at all designed, those interviews weren't at all designed to be the source of more information than that, quite frankly. Because thankfully, those representative samples already exist, and we were able to pull from them heavily in order to inform our findings.
Thank you. In your report, you referenced in the previous slide was on, I think it's on page 7. The example of, so if you give that the map that you okay. So when you say Latinx here, I mean Latinx, who are you referring to?
This is representative sample American Community Survey, like U.S. Census data, and the race categories are defined by the U.S. Census, and that bottom bar is for Hispanic or Latino, Latina ethnicity of any race.
But you all are researchers. You're aware that 96% of Latinos don't embrace that term, that description, though, right?
I actually wasn't aware of that, and I thank you for educating me.
Yeah, Pew Research.
Okay. Thank you very much, Council Member.
So we don't want to alienate them, or any group for that matter.
I agree with that. We're going to be changing our behavior moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Morrison?
I just want to add just a couple of things. In your report, you found what you found. And this report was established on the parameters that City Council provided to you to research.
Yes.
So what they provided you to research, you researched the information that City Council provided to you to research.
Correct.
Okay. So if there was anything else that was needed, omitted, wasn't clear, it could have been included, and we could have readily addressed that.
The scope of the questions didn't change throughout the assignment. I'm not sure I understand your question, though.
Well, I'm just saying we couldn't answer every question that's out there.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. So we had to have a limit to start, to do the research, to find something to come back to give us the findings that we found.
Can I answer this one?
Yes.
And now I want to clearly say the issues and crimes that we have are not unique to Brooklyn Park. No. But what is unique to Brooklyn Park is how you identified is how we address the issues that's in Brooklyn Park. How we move forward and proactively take responsibility to address the issues that's reflective of who we are in Brooklyn Park. Okay. So you was just giving us, again, an outline of some circumstances, situations that rose to the level of this research for us to understand and comprehend, for us to decide on how we move forward with those. Again, policing in anybody's community are reactors, which means police respond after something done happen. So if the cause for the domestic violence to go to low-level crimes or any of those things, it ain't the police that's that problem. It's the lack of attention and or resources available and or education to those of domestic violence experiences and or poor economy or communities or lower disproportionate monies being allocated to communities that's suffering that's unstable, as you referenced. So if money was allocated in those areas, research shows that we wouldn't have those crimes. Police wouldn't have to go out to attend to those reactionary police calls. So they're just responding to issues that need some more attention to being allocated in those particular areas. And you also made mention that youth in our community, a lot of them, a great percentage, are not involved and or engaged in some of the programming that we hear, unaware of these particular programs. So by them not being aware, then we need more work to do to engage those youth to be part of these programs that we know that's out there, or we say that's out there. Okay, I just wanted to clarify those things and put it out there that we still have work to do. So if there's youth, 90+% of that's not involved or engaged in some things that's going on in our community, we have to find out why. And I don't want to put the responsibility on our police department, because our issues are not just unique to Brooklyn Park. Once again, everybody is dealing with issues regarding policing. But how we deal with those issues in Brooklyn Park would be unique to Brooklyn Park. Okay? And I'm going to conclude with that and just say thanks again for your research.
Sure. If I may just add, the other thing that is unique to Brooklyn Park is the scorecard. So that scorecard's purpose is really to have a transparent conversation about some of the things, some of the questions that were asked today. Knowing that not everybody in the community necessarily can be involved in that scorecard, but it is going to be something that you guys can look at, and it's really specific to the information that you have, and I think that's what makes it unique, is that you'll have that based on the things that we looked at that is for your city.
Councilmember Pa.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem West Hafner. I'm going to ask Jay, I can't remember, what was the dollar amount that we allocated towards this research?
Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem West Hafner, I believe it was either $50,000 or $65,000. Just looking for a little confirmation from staff in the back. If you could just send me a quick text.
We can answer that.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
You guys can
Yeah.
answer that.
We actually, Brooklyn Park paid $50,000, and the study was around $70,000 with in-kind from Wilder.
Thank you. And I asked that because, one, I don't remember, but I do remember it was a low amount. So I just want to say that I did not expect that you're going to go out there and interview thousands of people, so I just want to put that out there. There are specific things that we did want to see come out of this research, and I think that you've met all of that. From the beginning, I've always said we need to fund more money towards this work, but that didn't happen. So with the amount of money that we did fund, I think you guys did an excellent job giving us the things that we can do to improve and giving us some clarity as to what our community thinks, and something more in depth, not just the one or two questions, but really something more in depth. So I think that this is just a start. This isn't the end. I don't think it was meant to be the be-all. And so this is a start for us to say, where can we improve? What can we do? And that's going to change as well. As we start doing things, we'll see what else we need to do. My biggest thing is that as a person of color myself, as someone who's had interactions with police departments, Brooklyn Park and non-Brooklyn Park, I know that there truly are work that we have to do to improve how our police interacts with our community and communities of color. But it does not end there, because again, it's the whole entire community coming together, all partners, everybody, residents, in order for there to be true community safety. And it's not just one department's responsibility, but again, this is just a start, and I do believe when we talk about all the recommendations here, I know that some who have not had the experiences, the lived experiences, may think that stuff like this doesn't exist or doesn't happen, but I just want to say that we hear it from people in these interviews, hear it from me who's gone through it. It does exist. And it doesn't matter that 1,000 times our police officers did a great job, but 10 times they didn't. Because to those 10 people that something happened to, that's a big event. That's a life-altering event. And those are the 10 we're trying to prevent. I think our police officers do a great job. Do I think we need improvements? Absolutely. And so we want them to do their job. We want to support them to do their job and give them the tools they need. But this is a starting point for us to do that. So I want to thank you for your time, and I just want to say that if we want to see more comprehensive, more detail, and more research, we have to be willing to pay for it. And we have to be willing to invest in it. The same thing with outcomes. If we want to see better outcomes in our community following this recommendations, we have to actually invest in it. Because if we don't, nothing's going to be done. Nothing's going to change. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm last, so hopefully not least. I just want to let you know, to say thank you to you guys and HRC and MAC, because it was a lot of work to get done. There's some things that I can't quite wrap my head around yet, so there's a lot of information to digest and kind of figure out how it all works together, or how potentially what that means. You know, what is the outcome that's going to come from implementing some of those things. So I know that we're potentially going to be talking about it some more in depth as a group. So I'm excited about that. I think some of the things, I mean, the map that you showed is the history of Brooklyn Park, right? So that light blue area is where all those buildings, all the apartment buildings were built in the 1960s. We're trying to change some of that. You know, we put policies in place for the jobs that we bring here are good jobs, the companies that come here and that we try to get to come here, pay decent wages, you know, that they have programs and stuff for people like our youth to participate in. So I think, and then just our youth work all together. I mean, that's, in my opinion, that's a big chunk of what you're missing in here, is that there are a lot of things that we're doing there already. You know, Councilmember Pa's right in the fact that we are going to have to figure out how to invest in stuff. And I see some, and Councilmember Pa and I are on another group that Kira is doing some research around around evictions and stuff. And in my head, it's sort of, they're very synergetic, these two groups of things, and kind of what ended up coming, kind of the findings out of that and the findings that you guys have. It wasn't a surprise to me. I mean, you're telling our story. That is our story. That is our history. That is who's here, you know, and we need to do the best that we can with what we got. I think one of the things that stuck out to me pretty substantially is just kind of this, and one of the things I tried to wrap my head around was just and I know this is Census American Survey data, so you guys don't really control how it's broken down. But some of it is just really misleading, I think, because it's confusing, I guess, because it's saying in one place that we're sort of, that there's systemic racism and stuff, but yet it's pockets of people of color that are actually doing better than everybody else in town, you know. So that's, at least that's for home ownership and then income, you know. Like the Asian group is, but I know that there's more, that there's deeper information behind that, and I think that's the hard part when people just see this, to sort of focus on this and not really understand that, you know, the Asian group is probably broken really up into like 10 different places or 10 different groups, so there's subsets inside that group that aren't doing as well as other groups, and Asian is, you know, Indian all the way to, you know, Hmong or whatever. I mean, so, and that's the same with Black, and the same with African, and the same with the two or more races, you know. I mean, I think that's the part that we need to spend some time sort of digesting some more, is really getting to which groups could we have some impact on, because we're not going to necessarily change that map right away. I think, you know, like I said, we put policies in place about jobs. We put an affordable housing policy in place for new projects that are coming. We have some that are going to come online. And then our youth work that we've done already. Obviously, there's stuff that's still missing. I think the hard part is what Councilmember Jacobson said. We get people in the community that say, police need to do their job. Like, they need to be okay to do their job. And what that job looks like, I think, is the part that we come into, and sort of maybe there's some of these things that we can help, kind of make some inroads on. But ultimately, we don't fund all the county or all of the services in the county. We're one city inside the county, and the county is really kind of in charge of service dollars. And so I think there has to be not only us working together, but other cities working together, the county working together, everybody kind of coming together and synergizing some of this stuff. Because I know that there's people that are in our city that need services that they don't have them. And I don't know if that's because they're refusing them or if that's because there isn't money, but there is, additional funding from the state through general assistance and, Minnesota supplemental assistance and things that they can tap into depending on their population. So there's a lot more to it, I guess, is what I'm getting at, is that this is just tip of the iceberg stuff, and there's so much more to kind of dig into the report. But I think, we want to be in front of things and trying to do things first if we can, but ultimately sometimes you have to sort of take best practices and understand that you don't have to learn the hard way with that stuff. So I think that's everything for me, so sorry about the rambling. Is there anybody else that had anything else they wanted to say? Okay, Councilmember Jacobson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. One of the things that you guys often heard me say in the committee meetings was around the scorecard. I have used a scorecard system in my own work in nonprofits that I've run over the years. And I believe that a scorecard is never to be used as a dashboard to go, oh, look at that. This is how we scored. But to drive our work each and every day. And so I'm looking forward to us utilizing the scorecard in that way. But I also know, as I've spoken with City Manager Strobel, and one of the things that I think is unique about Brooklyn Park is that a continuous improvement lens is on every department already in this city. And you don't see that in many communities. And so I credit Mr. Strobel for his belief in that process. And so I think that again has set us apart. But with that lens on it, I also think that when you have a scorecard and you're really diving into that information, I'm not really interested in that necessarily landing on a police officer's plate to try to then, when we're driving the work, figure out how to do that. And so I think it's a different skill set. And so I want us to get ready potentially to invest in that as well. I don't know if you would agree with that type of thinking.
Yeah, we left it really open for the city, for you to figure out how that should look. And again, this is a unique tool that was created for your city. I also wanted to add that based on what you've talked about, you guys are sort of at the cutting edge, if you will, about looking in the mirror and trying to dissect some things. And we haven't had that experience with in the research and just personally on the work that we have done. So I commend you for that. But if we could say, like, what should you do with a scorecard, having somebody that was able to kind of lead the efforts and bring a group together, that would be really helpful. I think it's really important to have law enforcement's voice at the table, absolutely. But asking, somebody to add that to their plate, I could see a role being specific for just guiding the scorecard and the work that goes in the dissemination of that and analyzing it and all that sort of thing. And whether that's a person within the city and it has a unique spot, or you look for a consultant or something like that, it could be either or both.
Well, I think that's everything. Thank you guys so much. I'm sure we'll be seeing you a little bit more for future stuff, probably hitting you up. So
Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming.
Good evening.
You too. All right, so we'll move on to 4, which is consent agenda.
So move.
Second.
Okay, consent agenda has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes. So we'll move on to 7.1, I believe, because we do not have any public hearings or land use actions. So 7.1 is the resolution to rescind 2020-46 regarding local emergency due to the pandemic. I believe it's Mr. Strobel or Mr. Thompson that's going to walk us through this one.
Mayor Pro Tem Wes Hefner, members of the council, yeah, I'll get things going and then turn it over to Mr. Thompson for a more full explanation about what we're going to be doing or propose to doing this evening. Last year in 2020, related to the pandemic, we did put a local emergency in effect, which was ultimately approved by the City Council. Similarly, the governor did the same. The governor's order has since ended, concluded on July 1st. Originally, we thought that was going to happen on August 1st, but it ended up happening a little bit earlier. When we evaluated the need for the continued local state of emergency being in place, we didn't see a rationale for it at this time. Obviously, the pandemic itself is a little bit of an unknown in terms of what might happen in the future, but we do hope clearly that we continue the trajectory that we're on and that we continue to make progress throughout Minnesota and clearly in Brooklyn Park. So with that, the action this evening would adopt a resolution rescinding the resolution passed by the City Council, Resolution 2020-46, regarding that local emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And with that, happy to take any questions or if City Attorney Thompson wants to illuminate any further.
Okay.
I guess I did a good job.
You did. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Thompson.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, just maybe to add one thing. It was really a two-step process a year and 3 months ago. The first one was the mayor declared a local emergency. The council then adopted the resolution that's before you tonight to rescind. And then there was a separate independent action by the EDA president. Well, Mayor Lundy was the EDA president and the mayor at the time, but he had to make the determination not to hold the meetings in public and remotely. So that was the second step. So if the council adopts this resolution tonight, then the Mayor Pro Tem and EDA President Jacobson will sign the statement that's in your council packet, but that statement itself does not require council action. Just rescinding the emergency requires council.
I'm just wondering if there's anything specific in this rescinding of this resolution that would affect the council or the community. If there's anything specific that rescinding would actually impact how we do things or the community or any kind of resources or any kind of anything that would impact the community.
Mayor Pro Tem Wes Hefner, Councilmember, members of the council, at one point last year there were some strings attached, or actually I would say that we were doing a little bit of belts and suspenders because the governor had the declaration of emergency in place and we sort of covered ourselves by having our own local emergency. Some of the reasons why we did that is because at times some of those federal resources that we can request reimbursement for or get other resources, sometimes that's easier to get or that is required to have a local emergency declared. At this time, we don't think that that's no longer the case. Okay. We think that we're in good shape with the current American, the ARP dollars tied to the COVID relief. We wouldn't have any limitations. And I am not aware of any private value to our residents or businesses that would benefit from this local emergency being in place. I think if that was the case, that the governor would have continued to fight to have the state emergency in place or the governor's declaration, because I know that was part of the rationale for the governor wanting to retain that local declaration or that state declaration. And I don't believe that that's any longer the case is my understanding, but it is something that City Attorney Thompson and I did discuss, but at this point we feel comfortable rescinding this.
That sounds good. I guess I want to make sure there's nothing that could negatively impact us. Thank you.
Okay. Looking for a motion. Did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a question.
Microphone.
Yeah, I have a question. This was put in place for COVID, is what I'm understanding?
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Morrison, Council, or Mayor Pro Tem West Hafner, members of the council. Yeah, this was put in place due to COVID back in, I'm seeing if there's a date, the governor did it March 13th of 2020. We did it on March 20th of 2020. At that time, again, there are some instances where having this declaration clears a path for us to get state resources or federal resources, and it was sort of advised at that time to put this in place. It also allowed us, with some of the provisions related to meeting in person as a group of this body or commissions or the EDA, there's also, it provided some guidance relative to what we could and couldn't do for some of those parameters that were established by the governor.
More questions. Is it a reason why we need to do this right now? That's one question.
Yeah, Councilmember Morrison, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, we were, there is, and maybe Mr. Thompson can shed a little bit more light on this, when there's no longer a relevancy for the state of emergency, there's good practice to not have that state of emergency declared, is the way that Mr. Thompson explained it to me. Recognizing that the governor was slated towards, initially we had heard August 1st, and then we heard, and then it's now been July 1st, that the governor no longer has that state emergency declared. The value and the relevancy of having that local emergency declared became less important. And so that's why we're bringing it before the council this evening.
Okay, and the last question, I probably should have asked you before I asked that question was, is there a concern that Delta is out there? Isn't that similar or the same? And if we rescinded this and we're faced now with the challenges of an aftermath of Delta, we would have to go back and do the same thing. I understand that you said that the governor has rescinded it. It's not standing for the governor. But if Delta is an alarming virus that's out there, would that be of concern? That shouldn't be of concern of us also? If it remained intact, we would be covered for this if it manifested itself to a greater level that that COVID did. So that's what my concern is.
Yeah.
Rescinding this, yeah.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem West Hafner, Councilmember Morrison, members of council, without question, there is still, as I mentioned a moment ago, some unpredictability with regard to COVID and the Delta variant, as you just brought up. So there it is uncertain. At some point we might have to put back in protocols of meeting remotely, of 6 feet separation, of the DMV only taking appointments, of going back to some of those things. At this time, we hope that that doesn't happen. The state of Minnesota, and at least locally, we fared fairly well in terms of the trajectory of COVID, and we hope that that does go in place. But this does not preclude us from, in the future, taking those actions. In fact, we don't have to have a local emergency declared to take some of those steps. We can do that as an organization. But there does have to be some justifications for certain actions to take. In terms of meeting remotely, I think Jim can talk a little bit more about those steps if the council desires. But taking this action at this point, given the fact that most of society is definitely headed back in the direction of some level of normalcy, seems like the appropriate step at this time.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Safner and Councilmember Morrison. Yeah, I'm not sure I can just explain it much better, but to answer your specific question, if something were to happen, and the first step in this is the mayor proclaims the emergency, or Mayor Pro Tem, and that's in effect for 72 hours, and that can be done like that. You don't have to schedule a council meeting. You have to extend it by the city council, but it's very easily done. And there are situations where there are truly a local emergency that's not a statewide emergency, all right? A major sewer break, a collapse of a road, something like that, where you have the authority to do your own local emergency, even though it's not a statewide emergency. Here, the adoption of the local emergency was a offshoot, if you will, of the statewide emergency because of COVID. Not all cities adopted local emergencies. Many did because of the reason that City Manager Strobel just summarized it. You wanted to be sure if there was some funding mechanism that required a local emergency that we had it in effect. So now that the statewide emergency has been undeclared, could it hypothetically a pocket of COVID or Delta variant pop up in some city that's not statewide and form a basis for emergency? That's possible, but it's pretty easy to stop on a dime on this one and put something in place if that were to happen.
Thank you. I just need to get clarity for myself because I know they talk about Delta, and if Delta is just as vigorous and violent as COVID, maybe we okay, but if that's the case, and again, I just had to get clarity because I didn't know from the beginning, okay? But thanks a lot, gentlemen.
Thank you. Councilmember Russell?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to put a motion on the floor to waive the reading and adopt resolution number 2021, rescinding resolution number 2020-46 regarding local emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
Mayor Pro Tem,
Councilmember,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Just one thing I should point out for the public is once this is adopted and the declarations by the EDA president and Mayor Pro Tem have been signed, boards and commissions will not be able to meet remotely either. They will have to meet in person, and I just thought we ought to put that out there so that they were aware of the consequences of doing that also. Thank you.
Okay. This thing's a little messed up, so it might have been Mr. Thompson that actually hit his button there. Okay, so we got a motion and a second, and it doesn't feel like there's any further discussion. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and that passes. Thank you. So we'll move on to discussion items, which we don't have any. So we'll move on to council member reports and announcements. I don't know who pushed their button first. It's kind of messed up here, so I'll just go. Councilmember Parks, I think you were first.
I just want to say that Councilmember Morrison and I attended the ribbon cutting for the new Caribou up on 85th and Broadway. We were there for maybe an hour, half hour into an hour, and that line, the drive-through line was steady. So it's going to be interesting once if we get light rail, how that's going to work with that, because the line was actually out onto Broadway. So they're going to be a busy one. That's it.
Councilmember Russell?
Thank you. Just wanted to let folks know that there is still vaccine available, and I know some folks are concerned about the sudden increase of the Delta variant virus, especially among people of color. At least that's been the information we've received from Minnesota Department of Health and from Governor Walz's office. So there are still a number of vaccination clinics going on around the city, free. The city partnering with a number of organizations to put those on. There will be some vaccinations too available at the farmers market on Wednesday. I'm not sure the exact date has been announced yet, but I just want folks to know that there is still availability for people to go out and get vaccinated if you have not been vaccinated, because the Delta variant is spreading, especially among people who have not yet taken their vaccine. There are some incentives. We're not offering any incentives, but the county is, and some counties are offering pretty generous incentives to get people to go out there and take the vaccine. So if you have not taken the vaccine, please get out there and take it. And it's free, and it's no barrier. You just walk in and you can take your vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pa.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem West Hafner. So first, I just want to say thank you to Councilmember Jacobson for bringing together the faith leaders in our police department, in our community, and addressing crime and violence in our community and how we could work together to do that. I did go to the 21 Days of Peace rally, kind of the kickoff, and I'm so excited that our faith leaders in our communities, all of them are coming together to really do this 21 Days of Peace on 63rd and Zane. One thing I did hear from the people that came there is that it would be great to have our city staff, our community development staff, and our police officers out there with them to engage with the people that are coming as well. And then also it'd be great to have resources such as food and housing and financial resources for help for those who need it right now, of where they can go to get those things. And then with the kids being on summer break right now, it'd be great if we could have some kind of a food give out for families and for kids in the neighborhood, because that is that neighborhood where there's a lot of kids who don't have the food security that they need. If we could give out food during this 21 Days of Peace, where kids know they can come there and get a meal, families know they can come there and grab a couple meals for their kids, that would be fantastic during this time. So I just wanted to let Jay know that, if you can kind of follow up on that, and then let the rest of you guys know that there is a sign-up sheet. We can sign up. Faith leaders, any community member can sign up to be a part of and volunteering during that time. And so I hope to see some of you guys out there. I know I'm going to be out there. Thanks.
Remember, Pa, where's the sign-up sheet?
It's online.
Yes. She probably.
So, get you the link.
Okay, so maybe send it to Mr. Strobel, and then he can get it out to all of us. So, okay, anybody else? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to the city manager for reports and announcements. Oh, for Morrison, my apologies. You must have just pushed your button right when I turned my head. Did you have some more?
I just want to add that that 21 Days of Peace is being hosted by the HRC, and I'm excited to be a part of that, as well as Councilman Jacobson. And I also want to say that I had an opportunity to tour Huntington Place the other day, and what I saw was kind of exciting. They had put in barricades and put in speed bumps to redirect traffic, to slow down traffic, and then they had armed guards there to protect the residents in the community after hearing some negative activity was supposed to have participated over the past few weekends there. And what they did, they jumped into action and they hired armed guards to deter, to redirect traffic. People that didn't come in for regular visitorship, but was part of the things that was going on, they asked them, "What were you there?" So when they told them they was there to be participating in those things, that was the activity that they didn't want, they turned them away. And that was to be commended. It averted anything from happening there. I walked the premises and grounds and seen where some of the plans of the new Huntington Place vision lied, from playgrounds for the kids to grilling picnic areas for the residents there. As we discussed, some of those residents may not never own a house. That apartment may be all that they own, and they want to feel as though this is theirs. They want to go out and barbecue. They want to go out and do those things, sit on picnic grounds and those type of things. And those are all the plans that were shared with me while I was there, as well as some of the other security measures there, closing off some other areas in Huntington Place that prevent unwanted traffic to have access to limit them, as well as just to try to deter a lot of the unwanted activity in Huntington Place. So I was excited about the things that was presented to me, to the executive team, as well as the things that they're looking to put in for families and the residents that's there. They also talked to me about tearing down some of the garages that they had there and start building new townhomes there for 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, replace the garages to make that like a community with avenues and streets, not avenues, but streets in there where people live on a named street and they got a townhouse or something in there. So I thought those things was interesting. I thought people should know that what Aon had proposed and their vision in that particular community that I think is actually the new Huntington Place once we see it realized. But I just thought that I would share that information with you because I thought it was some great news to share about Huntington Place. Again, some great news about Huntington Place. So I was excited about that, and I just thought that we could share that information. But thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Mr. Strobel for City Manager reports and announcements.
Yep, Mayor Pro Tem Wes Hafner, members of council, just a few things this evening. A number of community events this week to make folks aware of. A couple events tomorrow. There's a mayor forum tomorrow evening from 6:30 to 7:30 in City Hall. It'll also be live streamed on Channel 16, and then also I think we're going to be Facebook Living it as well. There's a Music on the Lawn event at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening at the Community Activity Center. There's lots of music events coming up. There's another one on the 20th at the CAC. There's one on the 22nd, I believe, at the farm, and then another one on the 27th at the CAC. So a lot of music on the lawn events for the community to participate in. We also are having on the 14th, so on Wednesday, the American Recovery Plan Fund community meeting to get some input, which will be held virtually from 11 to 12 to get some input on those funds available related to COVID relief and economic recovery. So I encourage folks to go to the website to get that. Our farmers market is up and running. This will be the second week, so at the CAC from 2 to 6:15. I guess we had a great showing last week, and we're looking forward to that farmers market continuing into, I believe, into October. And then just a reminder that we will be having a work session, a special work session next Monday to talk about continue the conversation on the Wilder report. I was able to get some input from a few of you in terms of if 5:30 would work for folks, and if so, I think it would be best to plan for a 5:30 start. If 5:30 is a challenge for anyone, let me know, and we'll plan for a 6 o'clock start. But I think 5:30 for the folks who I spoke with today, it seemed to be that was the preferred starting time. So we'll go with that, and then unless I hear from otherwise. So that's it for this evening. Happy to take any questions.
Mr. Strobel, so will there be, I think I saw on Facebook that at some of the music in the park stuff, there was going to be some food trucks and stuff?
Yeah, typically we are trying to arrange food trucks at the Music on the Lawn event, so it's a great opportunity to get a little food, get a little music, and they also have an opportunity if they want to catch the forum here and then going out to listen to music and getting some food. So a lot of stuff to do on the government campus tomorrow night.
And then the special meeting next week at 5:30, is it going to be here in Chambers or like in a different one of the conference rooms?
Yeah, this will be our first potential work session in many months in person. I think it might be best to do it here because there might be some community interest in attending the meeting. And, if council wants, we could also potentially live stream it on TV as well. So I'd just love to get some feedback on that. Typically, we don't live stream the work sessions, but I think, given the fact that we might have more people than normal, we could have it in here versus in the new conference room upstairs. And so I think that would probably make the most sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Hearing no one, or we don't have any other business, I'm going to adjourn the meeting.